Some betrayals don't shout, they whisper. They nod politely in the hallway, copy you on emails, and steal what you built while smiling in your face. This is the story of Megan Lewis, a project manager who believed loyalty still meant something, and Chris Dalton, the supervisor who taught her that some people wear ambition like armor and use kindness as a key. What began as mentorship turned into maneuvering, and what looked like progress became a slow, quiet erasure of the woman who kept the floor from collapsing. Megan's fall wasn't dramatic. It was a spreadsheet sent without her name, a meeting invite she wasn't looped on, a client she'd cultivated handed off for efficiency. By the time she realized what Chris was doing, the ground had already shifted under her. She lost her job. She lost the place where her mornings made sense. And for a moment, she almost lost the part of herself that believed in fairness. But life has a longer memory than any office. The pattern weaves back. The choices count. And the same shortcuts that took Megan's career would become the trap Chris set for himself. Stay to the end. When the truth finally speaks, it's not loud, but it is undeniable. And if you believe justice doesn't need an invitation to arrive, subscribe. When justice found, the scales always find their balance. On her first day back after the holiday break, Megan arrived early, the way she always did. She liked the hum of the building before it woke up, the way the elevator doors sighed open like a stage curtain. Her desk plant had new leaves, bright as a promise. She straightened the stack of project binders she kept like a second brain and opened her email. There he was, in her inbox and in her periphery. Chris Dalton, the new floor supervisor, a transfer from the Chicago office with a resume that read like a highlight reel. In person, he was disarmingly casual, rolled sleeves, soft laugh, eyes that stayed on you just long enough to be flattering. During his first week, he made a lap around the floor with 2 coffees, setting one on Megan's desk. "You're the person to learn from," he'd said. "Everyone points to this wall and says, 'Ask Megan.'" It felt good to be seen. It felt earned. The first change was easy to like. Chris suggested a Monday huddle to keep the heat off the team. The second change sounded efficient. Consolidate client touchpoints so we speak with one voice. The third change didn't sound like anything, just a meeting on her calendar she wasn't required to attend, a core group alignment to which she wasn't essential. She noticed it again on a Thursday when the elevators were slow and the air tasted like burnt coffee. A weekly metrics email, one she'd compiled for 3 years, went out from Chris's account. He'd copied her on it with a smiley face. Streamlining. "Looks great," she laughed, then didn't. In the next all-hands, he presented a roadmap that wore her handwriting. The milestones she'd drafted, the risk flags she'd color-coded, the client temperature notes she'd nurtured carefully. It was all there, spoken in his voice, with footnotes that skimmed over her name like a stone skipping water. Afterward, he clapped her shoulder. "Couldn't have pulled this together without your groundwork." Groundwork. As if she were the shovel, Megan tried to say something to HR that afternoon, even just to name the feeling, but it sounded like weather. "He's repackaging my work," she said, aware of how small it sounded. The HR rep smiled with concern. "Transitions can be bumpy. Take the weekend, breathe. You're valued here." She did take the weekend. She ran by the river where the wind slapped sense into her and made a list labeled, "What's mine?" Client relationships, institutional memory, the respect of the team. Monday she set a boundary. She sent Chris a shared doc with clear ownership on deliverables and set recurring check-ins. He responded instantly with a thumbs-up emoji and a new calendar series titled Sync, the same slot as one of her client calls, the Dudty. Syncs were polite suffocation. Chris clarified decisions she'd already made. He tightened timelines she'd negotiated carefully with vendors. He forwarded her emails to leadership after shaving off her context and adding a paragraph of his interpretation. "We're a team," he said when she bristled. "And your instincts are great. I'm just, helping with air cover." Air cover felt a lot like shade. The day everything changed, she walked into Conference B with a deck she'd been iterating since October. The client, Cortland Logistics, was the kind of whale that could feed half the office. Megan had shepherded them through 2 pilot projects and could read their CFO's moods better than weather apps. Chris sat at the head of the table, laptop open, posture easy. "Let's keep this crisp," he murmured. She started strong: market shifts, fleet utilization, projected cost avoidance. But when the CFO asked a question about a vulnerability Megan had flagged weeks earlier, Chris answered over her. "We've already mitigated that," he said smoothly, clicking to a slide she hadn't approved. "We'll roll the enhanced API by Q3. Megan blinked. There was no enhanced API. There was a proposal for one, full of dependencies and risk. She tried to cut in. "To be precise," Chris smiled, palm lifted. "We'll take this offline." The CFO nodded, satisfied for now, and Megan felt the table tilt. After the meeting, in the hallway that always smelled like copier toner, she said, "You can't promise a deliverable that doesn't exist." He didn't even pretend to misunderstand. "We'll make it exist," he said, grin practiced. "I trust your resourcefulness. My resourcefulness won't invent a team we don't have." He leaned in, as if sharing a secret. "Then stop telling them what we don't have." The next week, Cortland Logistics signed the largest contract the floor had seen in 2 years. On the strength of the roadmap Megan had architected and the vapor Chris had sold. Leadership crowded his desk with congratulations. Someone brought champagne flutes that looked like test tubes. Chris lifted one and caught Megan's eye across the room, toasting the air between them as if they were in on the same joke. That night, Megan stayed late to update a risk register that felt like a confession. The building emptied. The lights narrowed to every third row, and she could hear the cleaning crew's cart squeak down the hall. She typed exposure, delivery commitments made without resourcing approval. She added mitigation steps that bordered on miracles. At 9:13 p.m., an email landed from Chris. Subject, ownership. Body, for simplicity, let's route all Cortland comms through me. CC me on anything client-facing. I'll take it from here. He didn't CC leadership. He didn't need to. Megan stared at the screen until the letters lost meaning. She'd done everything right, documented, escalated, collaborated, and still the credits rolled without her name. She closed the laptop carefully, as if it contained an animal that might bite. The email subject line said reorg update, which everyone knew was HR's way of knocking before they opened the door anyway. Megan read it standing by the office kitchen, the bitter smell of burnt coffee wrapping itself around her like a shawl. As we position for growth, restructuring, role redundancy, your position will be impacted. HR will reach out. Her fingers went cold before the rest of her caught up. Chris appeared like stage direction, carrying 2 paper cups. "You got the update?" he asked, voice pitched to sympathy. "Rough week. Let's find you a soft landing." Soft landing. She tasted copper. "You took my accounts," she said quietly. "Now you're taking my chair." "Cortland needs a singular voice," he replied. "And org charts need lines, not loops." "You're talented, Megan. That's not in question." He offered a cup like an olive branch. "Oat milk?" I remembered. She didn't take it. "I built Cortland." "You built trust," he corrected gently. "I scaled it." Then softer. "Look, I put in a good word with a partner firm. You'll land fast." He had already written her ending. HR's conference room had a box of tissues placed perfectly between 2 chairs. The rep, same scarf, same careful eyes, walked through the script. Severance, benefits through month-end, laptop return, the dignity of the exit interview. Megan answered everything as if it belonged to someone else. What would she miss? Her team. What did she learn? How to be invisible while holding up the ceiling. Any feedback? Document everything. It won't save you, but it will keep you sane. Back at her desk, a cardboard box waited like a punchline. She wrapped her mug in a scarf her sister knitted and tucked her plant into the corner like a passenger on a crowded bus. People approached in currents, some genuinely stunned, some performing surprise, some slipping questions into their condolences. "What happened?" She smiled, muscles obedient. "Reorg." Her closest teammate, Tasha, hugged her fiercely. "This is wrong," Tasha whispered. "I'll say it out loud if you won't." Don't, Megan said, throat tight. Keep your badge. When she turned to her screen to shut down, she saw it, a document open that wasn't hers, left like a footprint. Cortland, Final Deck V12, CD edits. She clicked before she could talk herself out of it. Edits in the margins like fingerprints, promises solidified, timelines tightened. A new slide titled API Acceleration with Approved stamped at the top. There was nothing in procurement, nothing in engineering headcount. She closed it quickly, heart drumming a code she didn't know how to read. She emailed herself the risk register and her notes, not files, just a copy of her own thoughts, because the truth was leaving the building with her. And she refused to let it evaporate. At 4:02 p.m., security collected her badge. The turnstile clicked like a metronome set to slow. Chris met her in the lobby with that same practiced warmth. "Stay in touch," he said. "I have a sense we'll cross paths again." She stepped into January air, so crisp it made her eyes water. On the sidewalk, she placed the box at her feet and laughed once, sharp and humorless. Then she did what she'd always done, took the next step. The first days were an echo chamber. She cleaned a refrigerator that didn't need it. She refreshed job boards like they were weather maps. She called her sister and lied, "I'm fine," when her savings spreadsheet told the truth. It didn't blink. Rent was a countdown. Health insurance was a cliff. But grief has a way of clearing space if you let it. On the third morning, she opened a blank document and titled it, "What I Know." She wrote for hours about vendor lead times, about how not to burn a client's goodwill on fake deadlines, about why trust erodes faster than budgets. She wrote like it was billable. She wrote like she was building a scaffolding for the person who would be asked to stand again. By the weekend, she had a portfolio site that wasn't pretty yet, but was honest. She made a list of small businesses within subway distance and set herself a schedule like a doctor's orders. 3 outreach emails before coffee, 1 cold call before lunch, 1 pro bono consult a week to keep her skills moving. When Tasha texted, Cortland already wobbling. "He promised them Q3. We have Q4 people at best." Megan stared at the screen. It felt like someone else's war now. She typed, deleted, typed again. "Be careful," she sent. "Document the asks. Keep receipts." Then after a long breath, "You know where to find me if you need advice after hours." That night, a message hit her contact form from a bakery owner who'd heard of her through a friend of a friend. "Our menu looks like a ransom note," the woman wrote. "Can you help?" Megan smiled into her tea. "Absolutely," she replied. "I can help." Rain stitched the city into a single grey sheet. Megan worked from her kitchen table, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of the refrigerator's every motor hiccup. The bakery draft spread across her screen like a clean room. Type hierarchy, price readability, a warm color palette that made cinnamon rolls feel like a hug. Her phone buzzed with a new email. A misfire, routed by autocomplete to the wrong Megan Lewis in the same city. She should have deleted it. She knew that. Instead, she skimmed the first line and her stomach dropped through the floorboards. "Per our call with Chris, please confirm the accelerated API is production ready by June 30th to align with contract milestones." June. Production ready? Megan closed her eyes and saw the slide she'd never approved. She typed a reply, then stopped. Ethics first. She forwarded the email to her old HR inbox with a single line, "Misrouted to me in error. Please advise on appropriate handling." An automated reply bounced back, mailbox no longer monitored. She breathed, counted, then did the next careful thing. She wrote to the CFO. "Hi, wrong recipient. I'm no longer with Halberd, and I believe this was intended for another Megan. Flagging so you can resend securely. Best ML." She hit send and went back to kerning the word croissant like her rent depended on it, which it did. 5 minutes later, the CFO replied, "Appreciate the flag. Since I have you, unusual request. You were the PM on our pilots. Off the record. Is June 30th realistic?" Megan's fingers hovered. This was a thin ledge. She chose honesty without sabotage. Off the record, not with current headcount and vendor timelines. It's achievable with proper resourcing and scope clarity. I no longer have visibility to confirm either. A long pause. Then thank you. That aligns with my gut. Would you be open to a short call? Not about Halberd, about what proper resourcing would actually look like from a neutral perspective. Paid consult if needed. Megan stared at the screen, a kaleidoscope of feelings, vindication, fear, relief at being asked for her brain and not just her badge. She typed, yes, 30 minutes. Neutral guidance only. On the call, she kept it clean. No names, no gossip. She outlined what a realistic plan would require: additional developers, a phased release, honest risk language. The CFO asked tight questions and listened like someone accustomed to fog. When they hung up, he said, if we'd had this conversation 2 months ago, I would have written a different clause. That night, Megan invoiced a consult fee that wouldn't save her month, but might save her belief in cause and effect. 2 days later, Tasha called from her car, whispering like the seats could hear. We're on fire, she said. They can't staff what he sold. People are jumping teams like lifeboats. Document, Taz, Megan said gently. And breathe. A week passed. The bakery signed off with heart emojis and ask forgiveness money. Megan printed the menu on thick stock and delivered it herself, inhaling the smell of sugar and new beginnings. She walked home in sunlight, remembering she had a body and a stride and a name that didn't need a building to mean something. That evening, the CFO emailed again. We're bringing in an external audit on delivery readiness. Would you be open to participating as a prior PM to speak to best practices? We'll clear it with legal. You'll be paid as an independent advisor. Megan read it twice. The ask wasn't to indict, it was to illuminate. Yes, she wrote. With boundaries, legal looped her in formally. Conflict of interest language. Disclosures. She kept her answers disciplined. Here is how to structure scope. Here is how to avoid sandbagging. Here is how to protect a client from being sold dates like souvenirs. She never said Chris's name. She didn't need to. The facts carried their own gravity. When the audit firm set dates, her stomach tried on the old anxiety like a dress that no longer fit. She breathed. She practiced truth-telling that didn't scorch the earth. On the morning of the session, she passed Halberd's glass tower on her way to the auditor's office. Through the lobby window, she saw Chris in profile, animated, phone to his ear, a man telling a room what it wanted to hear. For a heartbeat, the old anger rose like a flare, and then went out. He was not her weather anymore. The audit room smelled like paper and lemon cleaner. 2 senior auditors sat with laptops open. The CFO across from them, pen poised. They asked precise questions. Megan answered with the steadiness of someone who had counted nights by deliverables and learned where truth lives in a schedule. When they wrapped, the older auditor closed his notebook. You've just made our week shorter, he said wryly. The CFO shook Megan's hand. You turned the lights on. By the following Monday, whispers slithered through every corner of Halberd's glass tower. Emails were shorter, smiles tighter, and the usual Monday banter in the cafeteria had dissolved into the metallic hum of rumor. Someone had said audit, someone else had said misrepresentation, and though no one said his name out loud, everyone's eyes followed Chris Dalton when he walked by. He still carried himself like a man in control, crisp suit, expensive watch, that unshakable grin. But there was a tremor in his confidence now, small enough for most to miss. He noticed the sudden silence when he entered a room, the way conversations snapped shut mid-sentence. He noticed that his weekly check-ins with leadership had turned into "we'll reschedule." When the internal memo leaked, it wasn't a headline. It was a whisper that grew teeth. Commitments made without approval. Unverified. Deliverables. Client trust at risk. The kind of phrasing that HR departments and legal teams used when they were lining up paperwork before a storm. Chris tried to get ahead of it. He called a meeting with his team, voice rehearsed and confident. We'll cooperate fully, he said. Audits happen. We'll provide the data, clarify misunderstandings, and move forward stronger. He smiled, waiting for their nods. But the nods didn't come. They avoided his eyes, their loyalty already shifting toward survival. That afternoon, he called Tasha into his office. "You've been with Megan longer than anyone," he said. "You know this process inside and out. I need everything she documented on Cortland. Risk logs, old decks, anything. Let's get ahead of this." Tasha hesitated. "I thought all that was archived." "It's on the server," he pressed, his tone softening. "Help me out here." She met his gaze and calm, steady. "I think you should talk to legal before I touch anything. They've locked access to the Cortland folder." The realization landed like a blow. Locked. That meant legal was already inside his files. That night, Chris stayed in the office long after the cleaning crew had gone home. The city outside flickered through the windows like static. He opened his email and saw the messages stacking up like dominoes. Requests for clarification, meeting invites from compliance, subject lines like, "Need your input on timeline discrepancies." He opened one and stared at the attachment, an exported thread of emails between him and the CFO, his own words staring back. "Yes. Production ready by June 30th, fully staffed, guaranteed." He could already hear how that sentence would sound read aloud in a boardroom. He closed his eyes. He had built his entire career on being untouchable. His charm, his polish, his ability to make numbers bend around him. They had always saved him before. But charm doesn't audit well. By Thursday, he was summoned upstairs. The conference room had too much glass, too much light. HR was there, along with the head of compliance and a silent representative from legal. The folder in front of them was thick. "Chris," HR began, voice neutral, "we've reviewed the findings of the independent audit. It appears that deliverables were committed to the client without approval, resulting in material risk exposure. Do you have any documentation supporting these commitments?" He started to speak, but legal lifted a hand. "We're interested in whether you acted within your scope of authority." The air thinned. His throat closed. He said something about team alignment, about optimism, about how sometimes leadership requires taking initiative. The faces across from him didn't move. When the meeting ended, he walked back to his office and found his keycard deactivated. By morning, his desk was cleared. The email went out at 9:02 a.m. Effective immediately, Chris Dalton has left Halberd Industries to pursue new opportunities. Tasha read it on her phone, exhaling slowly. She forwarded the message to Megan with 2 words: "Justice found." Megan saw it while waiting for a client meeting to start. She didn't smile, not fully. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was closure, a quiet exhale after months of holding her breath. She set her phone down and took a deep, steady breath. The Cortland CFO reached out later that afternoon. "We're restructuring the account with new oversight. We'd like to bring you on as an independent advisor for the transition, if you're interested." Megan typed back, "Yes, I'm interested." The irony wasn't lost on her. The job Chris had stolen from her had just circled back, with better pay, cleaner boundaries, and her own name on the contract. That night, she walked past Halberd's building on her way home. The lobby was quiet. Chris's name had already been scrubbed from the directory. The city glowed against the glass like 1,000 small redemptions. She whispered to herself, "It's done." The article dropped on a Monday morning like thunder disguised as newsprint. "Audit reveals false promises behind Halberd's logistics expansion." Underneath, a smaller headline read, "Former project manager's documentation helps expose misrepresentation." And below that, in print so crisp it made her heart stutter, "Megan Lewis, independent consultant." She stared at the screen, coffee cooling untouched beside her. For months, she'd existed in the quiet grey between survival and rebuilding, trying not to look backward. But there it was, her name tied not to scandal but to truth. The thing that had been taken from her without ceremony was returning, not with applause, but with recognition that meant more. Her phone started buzzing, messages from old colleagues, LinkedIn notifications exploding like popcorn. "Tasha, girl, you're famous." Another from the CFO, "You earned every line of that article. Thank you again for your integrity." And one more, unsigned, from a blocked number. "Guess karma really does keep receipts." She didn't have to guess who sent it. Outside, Sunlight poured over the city like an exhale. Megan stepped onto her small balcony, the hum of morning traffic below, and let herself feel the rarest emotion of all. Peace. Not victory, not revenge, just peace. By midweek, the calls began. A small tech firm wanted her to consult on project integrity. A startup asked if she could help train their managers on ethical delivery planning. The bakery owner texted her, "You were right about the color palette. Sales are up 12%. For the first time in years, Megan didn't measure her worth in job titles or cubicle walls. Her reputation, rebuilt one honest action at a time, was now doing what reputation should, speaking for her. Meanwhile, the ripple of Chris Dalton's downfall spread through the industry. Halberd issued its careful statement, "A leadership misalignment has been addressed." Internally, they were scrambling to restore trust. Recruiters whispered that Chris had been seen pitching himself as a consultant, but the calls went nowhere. A man who once filled rooms now found them empty. Megan heard about it only in fragments, each more distant than the last. She didn't hate him. She didn't need to. His own choices had finished the work for her. One evening, weeks later, she was invited to speak at a professional ethics panel. She almost said no. Public attention still made her nervous, but something in her said yes. The event was held at a downtown conference hall, the kind with too much carpeting and bad coffee. When she walked onto the stage, applause rippled politely through the crowd. She took a breath and began, "I used to think injustice only happened in headlines. But it happens in offices, in boardrooms, in small moments that don't make the news. I lost my job because I spoke the truth too quietly. I learned that sometimes the truth whispers first, then it roars when it's ready." People leaned forward. Her voice didn't shake. "If you're sitting here wondering whether doing the right thing is worth it, I'll tell you, it costs a lot, but it pays back in peace. Justice isn't loud. It's steady. It's the sound of being able to look at yourself in the mirror and know you didn't trade integrity for comfort." The applause that followed wasn't explosive. It was warm, continuous, real. Afterward, several attendees approached her, not with flattery, but gratitude. A young woman with trembling hands said, "I'm in the same place you were. I thought I was crazy." Megan took her hand and said softly, "You're not. Just keep receipts and faith." That night, walking home under streetlights, she passed the old Halberd building. The lights were still on, people still working late, emails still flying into the void. But for her, that chapter was closed. She didn't slow down or look up. She just smiled and kept walking. Back in her apartment, she poured herself a glass of wine and opened a blank page on her laptop. At the top, she typed, "Justice found, consulting." Then below it, "Integrity isn't a strategy. It's the foundation." Her business was small, but hers entirely. She turned off the lamp and watched the city glow from her window. Somewhere a siren wailed, a cab honked, life moved forward, indifferent but honest. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was rebuilding anymore. She was simply living, and that was enough. The email arrived before sunrise, time-stamped 5:43 a.m. Megan opened it with one hand, while the other wrapped around her first cup of coffee. Subject, Keynote Invitation, National Ethics Summit 2025. Body, your work in exposing systemic misrepresentation within Halberd Industries has inspired many. We would be honored to have you share your story at this year's conference on corporate accountability. She reread the message 3 times. The words didn't fully register until the coffee went cold. There had been interviews, mentions, a podcast appearance or two, but this was different. This was the national stage, the kind of spotlight that once would have terrified her. Megan set her cup down and leaned back, letting the quiet of her apartment settle around her. The skyline outside was waking up, sun slicing through clouds like truth-cutting fog. She thought of how far she'd come, from the woman who once left a building with her job in a cardboard box to someone now being asked to teach others about integrity. 3 months later, she stood backstage at the summit, smoothing the edges of her notes. The conference hall smelled faintly of coffee and new carpet, the buzz of hundreds of professionals filling the space. Screens on either side of the stage displayed her name and title, Megan Lewis, founder, Justice Found Consulting. She smiled at the irony. The name had started as a quiet tribute to her journey, but now it had become something larger, a beacon for others who had faced injustice and refused to surrender. When the announcer called her up, applause rippled through the crowd. The lights were warm, the room impossibly large, but she grounded herself in the familiar rhythm of breath and honesty. 2 years ago, she began, I sat in an HR office and signed papers that told me I was redundant. I believed them. I believed that if you worked hard, stayed loyal, and told the truth, life would play fair. And when it didn't, I thought I had failed. Her voice steadied as she continued. What I didn't know then is that justice doesn't arrive on time. It shows up when you've stopped waiting for it, when you've already rebuilt yourself. It isn't loud. It doesn't need revenge to exist. Justice is simply truth that refuses to stay buried. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the projector. Faces softened, pens paused mid-note. She took a deep breath and smiled slightly. If you ever find yourself in the middle of an unfair story, remember, you're not at the end. The people who cheat, lie, or take shortcuts might win the moment, but they never win the whole story. Truth is patient. Karma is thorough. And integrity. Integrity always survives the storm. Applause erupted. Strong, genuine, a sound that shook the room. Cameras flashed. People rose to their feet. For a moment, Megan felt her knees tremble. Not from fear, but from the sheer weight of closure. Afterward, attendees lined up to speak with her, executives, interns, professors. A young woman said softly, "Your story gave me the courage to report what's happening at my job." An older man squeezed her hand and said, "You reminded me why I started teaching ethics in the first place." She smiled at each one, humbled. She hadn't meant to become a symbol. She'd just refused to disappear. Later that evening, in her hotel room overlooking the city, Megan opened her laptop to check the Justice Found Consulting inbox. Dozens of new messages blinked in. Requests for interviews, collaborations, offers to train teams. At the bottom, one subject line caught her eye. From Tasha Reynolds. Subject, still documenting. "Still grateful," Megan laughed softly, heart swelling. She replied, "Keep shining. And remember, the truth doesn't need a spotlight, it just needs time." She closed the laptop and walked to the window. Below her, the city glittered, alive with motion and noise, just as it had the night she'd left Halberd, with her life in a box. But tonight, she didn't feel small beneath it. She felt steady, seen and free. Justice had found her, but more importantly, she had found herself. No matter how long it takes, truth always comes home. You can't outrun integrity, and those who try to bury it will one day dig their own graves. Because justice isn't a moment. It's a mirror, and it always finds its reflection.